welcome back to another episode of the Oner podcast, the podcast where we break down and give our critique of movies all in one take. I'm Austin Archer, and with me, as always, is my childhood next-door neighbor and lifelong best friend,
Cramer, England.
What, Cramer?
That's a really good one. That was a horrible impression.
Stupid is as stupid does.
Stupid is as stupid does, ma'am.
Yeah, Cramer. Those look like comfortable shoes. I bet
those look like real comfortable shoes.
Yeah, those look like comfortable shoes. So, Robert Zemeckis has a new movie coming out on the day that we're recording this. It's November 1st. Yes. The movie is out. It's called Here. It's Robert Zemeckis teaming back up with Tom Hanks and Robin Wright. We will be doing that next week, but we thought because this new movie is out, we would look at the first time Zemeckis teamed up with Hanks or the last time too. I think that Hanks and Zemeckis have done lots of movies together. I think even Robin Wright and Zemeckis have teamed up since Forrest Gump, but this is the first time that all three of them have been back together since Forrest Gump. So we are looking at 1994's Forrest Gump.
Yes.
Today on the show.
I'm very excited about this movie.
So obviously, I got to say a few things right at the top. Obviously, this was a huge movie for us growing up. This was a big part of our adolescence. I think that we grew up, it was the unequivocal, opinion of everyone that we knew and our parents and everybody that like, this is a fantastic movie. Mm-hmm. I was coming back to this and I wanted to be, I really tried to watch it with a critical eye because I just was like, I haven't seen this movie in a while. I'm an adult now. I have a more refined, sophisticated taste. And I'd watched a few like YouTube video essays kind of tearing it apart and being like, Forrest Gump's not the classic that you think it is. It's actually like a really like, and people love to sort of, retroactively rip things, tear things down. And they point out like how messed up Jenny is and how that her treatment of Forrest is really problematic and all this stuff. And they sort of poke all these holes in it. And I was trying to watch it through that critical lens. And I'll just say for me, it didn't work. I was trying my best to not like the movie. I was trying so hard to be picky and critical. And I just kind of sat there and I was like, I'm sorry. This is this movie rules.
I know. The movie is so good. It's funny. I knew I was going to like it just because I've seen it so many times. But I did look at it more with a critical eye, but I was looking at it more to find the deeper meaning. Because when we saw this, first of all, I'm almost positive I saw this in the theater. I think you did. I feel like everybody did in our neighborhood. Like this was one of the movies that everybody was talking about. And I did not get the vast majority of this movie when I was a kid.
Sure.
As I've grown up, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I get it. But I haven't watched it in a long time, more with like the critical eye that you're talking about. So I was looking more at theme and character and all that stuff. And for me this time, the fact that there was nostalgia there, me and my family quote this movie still to this day, right? All the time. The fact that there was nostalgia there, but also the fact that there's so much theme and character development and just a lot of really good filmmaking that went into this. And so I gained an even deeper love for it because I was like, wow, this is a really, really good movie. Like this is the moviest movie that's ever movied. Like it's one of those movies that just stands out. Like, this is the movie.
There's so much movie in Forrest Gump. There's so much. When you say like, this is the moviest movie, like there's so much. I remember I heard someone say that about Megalopolis. They were like, that was so much movie in one movie. And it's like, Megalopolis has a lot of things in it for sure. Yeah. But this movie is one of those movies where it's like, the amount of detail, the amount of different sequences where they had an idea and they said, okay, how are we going to do that? And it's all just these little like passing moments that happen in a flash. And the movie is just so filled to the brim with these references and with these with scenery and stuff. And it very famously was a production that went way over budget, that shot for longer than it was supposed to, that they ran into all kinds of technical problems making the movie because they were attempting a lot of things that hadn't been done before. And that's sort of Zemeckis's calling card as a filmmaker throughout his career, is he's always trying to push film technology and try out new technologies and try out new things. But yeah, the movie, it comes together so well. For all the things that people criticize it for, it gets criticized heavily for how much it strayed from its source material. That, like, apparently in the book, the character of Forrest Gump is nowhere near as stupid as he's portrayed in the movie. He's actually much more of a self-determined adult and self-actualized adult. He has sex in the book. He drinks and does drugs and things like that. Like he's much more morally gray and experiments with the same things that we see Jenny experimenting with in the movie. So there's a lot of people that criticize it for how different it is from the source material. They criticize it for whitewashing or mythologizing or lionizing American history. They feel like it doesn't delve deep enough into the darker or more complicated aspects of our history. I can see where people are getting that from, but watching the movie the other night, I was going like, I think that's a pretty uncharitable interpretation of this film. Yes, we are watching the second half of the 20th century through the eyes of this character, and this character's perspective means that his perspective is kind of mythical and whitewashed and simplified, but we, the audience, can still see what's going on. Forrest is describing it as something very mundane, but we can see that what is actually happening is dark and complicated and hard, and we Forrest thinks that he's at a fun little party called a Black Panther party, but we know what the Black Panthers are. And so just because we're seeing it through this kind of simplified lens or potentially whitewashed lens, it doesn't mean that that's the filmmaker's view of those things. That's our main character's view of those things. But we, the audience, understand that, like, Forrest doesn't get who the Kennedys are. Forrest doesn't get who John Lennon is. Forrest doesn't get, Forrest doesn't get the significance of being in communist China, but we understand those things in the audience. And
I mean, the point of it is he's just kind of an observer, and we'll get into this more. I mean, first of all, one thing I wanted to touch on with you is people get mad that it strays from the source material. I wish more movies strayed from source material in many, many ways. Like, listen, a book and a movie are very different mediums, right? They're different, which each one is great. But you look back, I mean, we are so reverential to books these days that it comes at a detriment to movies sometimes. Like, you look at Jason Bourne, right? Bourne Identity, Bourne Supremacy, all that. They're nothing like the books, but it was a great idea, and they took it and made it into a great movie. And it's okay that it's not like the book. And this is also okay that it's not like the book. Like, Forrest is one of the things that I love about this movie is because it is so non-traditional in many ways. Because Forrest is an extremely passive protagonist. He doesn't ever he makes very, very little choices. People tell him to do things and he goes and does it, right? And like, hey, do this, go do this. But he's observing everything. And there's this, he is the type of character that other people change around him, or he inspires people to change, right? He's like the good in the world in some instances, right? And so everybody else kind of learns from him, right? He's not really taking everything. So having a passive protagonist as your protagonist is something very, very hard to do. But in this movie, it works perfectly because he's observing so much of our history. And just like you said, like, they're not making as much of a statement about everything. They're kind of letting you remember all of these things and be like, you know what? Wow. With him there, kind of like seeing that it's not as big of a deal, it makes you think about it differently. And I appreciate that they're not really taking, I mean, I'm sure they could have done more, but the fact that they're not really taking a stance on some of these huge issues just makes you think about it and kind of internalize it a little bit more. At least it did for me. So,
well, and I don't personally, I don't know that the filmmakers aren't, I don't know that it's them not taking a stance.
Yes.
I think that it's like, like when the schools are integrating and he's asking a kid at Alabama University that he goes to, the University of Alabama, hey, what's going on? And that kid says a racial slur and he goes, they're trying to get into the school. And I think it's clear that the movie is like, this is because Forrest's thing is, and I think this is where people get a little tripped up in 21st century political parlance, is like Forrest is just sort of a character who exists outside of prejudice or bigotry or hate. He doesn't really have those things. The only people he's ever mad at are people who are mean to Jenny. Like anybody that's mean to Jenny or his mama is going to get a beat down from Forrest Gump. But outside of that, even like his participation in the Vietnam War, he doesn't really have an awareness of what he's doing. When he talks about like we were looking for some guy named Charlie, he doesn't really have an awareness of like what he's just there. And he's like, I joined the military because some guy approached me after college and told me to. And then I met my best friend in the world, Bubba, and Bubba was really nice to me. And so when I was fighting in the war, I was kind of fighting to make sure Bubba was safe. And I was doing what Jenny told me to do, which was to try to stay safe. But he doesn't really have like a working knowledge of like the geopolitical ethics of what he's doing. He definitely like there's no racism that plays into Forrest or even like an ultra nationalism. And I don't see this as the filmmakers taking a neutral stance on history. I think they're showing very clearly like these events that happened that were significant, that mattered. But they're saying for this character, he's just sort of experiencing them as someone who his world is much more, it's about relationships. It's just about the people that, you said it better than I did. I guess I shouldn't say they weren't taking a stance. They were just not delving deep into everything. That's a lot. They go through a lot of events. And I think you're right. They're saying that racism is really wrong. Right. And all of that, they are kind of taking a stance, but they're just not digging very, very deep, because they're kind of letting you remember that instance and see it through his lens, which is like you're saying, he's kind of like, he doesn't have any of those issues, right? He cares very deeply about his family, right? His mom, he cares very deeply about Jenny and his friends, right? He'll kind of do anything for them. So, and Lieutenant Dan. Anyway, this movie's got amazing characters in it. So it does. It's like, I don't know. And there is some complicated stuff when you talk about Jenny, and people like to talk about how terrible Jenny is to Forrest and stuff. But like as a character, boy, she just has such a difficult and complicated life. And also I think I at least saw on this watch her struggle with the fact that she knows she would actually probably prefer to just have a life where she's romantically partnered with Forrest. But the way Forrest Gump is presented in this story, I think she has ethical problems with like the idea of being romantically involved with a man who maybe has the perspective and the intellectual capability of like a 10-year-old. And so you can see her being like, hey, Forrest, like you're maybe the most important person in my life and the only man that's ever been good to me in my entire life. But like, I can't explain this to you. I can't be your girlfriend, like I can't like, and I can't explain to you why, because you wouldn't really get it or it would hurt your feelings. And I think that I think what finally happens is when Jenny's at the end of her life and she just realizes, who cares? I'm marrying this guy. I think really, honestly, I totally saw so much more of Jenny's story in this rewatch as well. Yeah. And I think you're very much right. She had those feelings. I think she also felt like, I don't want to corrupt you. She sees Forrest as a very good person who is very simple, but is very good. And I think she thinks, if I'm with him, I'll just corrupt him. Right. Like, she doesn't have a good self-image of herself, even though Forrest sees the best in her. She doesn't see that in herself. Right. She keeps telling him like, Forrest, stay away from me. Mm-hmm. Not really because like, I don't like you. It's because it'll be nothing but bad. Exactly. Everything I touch, everyone I'm close to, and her life has been, nothing but disappointment and sadness and constantly trying to reinvent herself and constantly falling down and constantly
Yeah. And I think too, the fact that she was, her childhood was horrible. Like they talk about it in the movie, and the fact that she was sexually abused and, and just that she put herself through so many hardships. She just had a hard life. Right. And it's like, that seems consistent with that character, that she would have a low self-image of herself and not want to do this, to Forrest, but again, I mean, in this rewatch, Jenny was an awesome character. Like I actually really enjoyed watching her in this one because Robin Wright plays her very well. She's not in the movie as much as I remembered. Like every time she's in it, she's extremely effective. Like, and she's bringing a different perspective to Forrest, and she's kind of, she's all a part of this theme of him kind of observing the world, and she's very much the world, at that time.
I don't know if you noticed this on this watch through. I definitely noticed this, and I think this is the first time I noticed, but she's the only character, one of the only characters other than Forrest who we get to see images of her story when Forrest isn't around. Every other character is, it's all because it's Forrest's story that he's telling on this bench. So how could he possibly be showing us images of Jenny in nightclubs, or Jenny, doing heroin with some boyfriend who's strung out on how could he possibly have that information? He doesn't. It's the only time that the camera allows us to see a glimpse into the past of another character. We get little moments like him talking about Bubba's mom after he gave her the money. Like there's a few scenes that we get an image of that, like that's an image that Forrest, our protagonist, is not showing us through his memory, but he's at least talking about something that he has firsthand knowledge of. I gave Bubba's mom this money and she was able to move into this house, and that's something that he knows. But Jenny's story is the only other story that we actually get to observe when Forrest isn't around. He'll say, I thought about Jenny, but then the camera will show us what's actually happening in Jenny's life. And it's a departure from the story that Forrest is telling to whoever he's talking to on the bench at that moment. And and us, the audience, we're actually getting to see what.
Yeah. That's very true. I hadn't thought about it that way, but you're completely right. And I think the funny thing about that, again, kind of going into the non-traditional aspect of this movie, like that doesn't bother me. Like, and I love that they did that, because this is so much of Jenny's story as well. Because kind of, pretty much when the third act hits, he stops telling the story and he starts living it, right? Yep. Like he does talk to Jenny's grave, and that kind of comes back, but there is that weird, it's a little bit strange for a second, and then you kind of get used to it, but it works. The fact that they do show us what Jenny is going through, like how would he know that? It doesn't bother me because it fits so well in the context of the movie. But that's a really cool observation. I never really thought about that before.
It's cinematically correct, I think, to allow us, the audience, because again, it works with the theme of the movie of like Forrest is describing all of these things that are these major world events, but he doesn't know that he's not describing them in the way that anyone else would. So when he just says, I just thought about Jenny and I hope that it's kind of like going and seeing her at this club in Memphis. Hey, she got a job getting to sing in a show. He has no idea that he's going to a strip club. Right. But like he doesn't realize he just thinks Jenny's on stage singing.
He's so happy for her.
Yeah, he's so happy for her. And she, and so the movie is sort of continuing that idea of when he's thinking about Jenny while he's, on his shrimp boat, the movie's showing us what's and it's sort of it's setting up the dichotomy between what he's imagining for Jenny's life and what he hopes for Jenny's life versus the reality of her life, which is it was never what he actually hoped or wanted. She was always barely surviving really, really dangerous situations.
Yep.
Yeah. Let's start breaking it down. So just a spoiler warning in effect. We're going to talk about the plot of Forrest Gump if you've never seen this 30-year-old movie.
Well, and the funny thing is we're going to spoil the movie, but this is also history. So
yeah, it's American history.
A lot of American history in here. So sorry if you didn't know this, but It's not telling us anything we didn't know in 1994. So
yep. We open on Alan Silvestri's music and a feather. Alan Silvestri and Robert Zemeckis are a great team.
They are.
And this is maybe the best score from Alan Silvestri. I'd say this and Castaway are two of the most emotional scores from Alan Silvestri.
I think
Back to the Future is very iconic.
Yeah. That one's probably the most iconic, but I gotcha. Yeah.
And if we're going outside of Zemeckis, Silvestri also did the Avengers theme.
Yes,
and that's pretty,
which is still very prominent today.
Which I was also going to say, when you were talking about people need to be more comfortable straying from source material, one of the most popular kinds of movies today in the 21st century is comic book movies. Yes. And they get inspiration from comics, but the screenplay is almost always an original thing that is inspired by several different comics. But it's very rare to see just like a straight up movie adaptation of a comic. Like Watchmen is like the closest thing you're going to see to a adaptation that like takes a graphic novel and directly adapts it. But I do think that screenwriters should feel free doing whatever they feel like they need to do to tell their story in the best possible way. And if that means that you need to change some details of the source material, if that's going to be better for the movie, do it. But beautiful score by Alan Silvestri, and this feather is floating around, and right away we're visually introduced to one of the major themes of this film. As you said, Forrest is a passive protagonist, and one of the central questions of the film is Forrest just floating through his life and these things are just happening to him, or is there some agency there? Does he actually have some control over, do any of us actually get to control the outcomes of our lives, or are we just being blown around by a breeze?
Is it destiny? Right? Or are we just floating around? Which this theme, like after I watched it this time, it was much more clear, to me, which I was blown away on this one. Like, wow, that's really a pretty, and also again, Forrest is like, we'll talk about it later, but he kind of is of two minds. Like maybe it's both, and I love the feather.
We will get there. We will get to maybe it's both.
I love the feather coming in, and he just kind of, you don't really understand it. And on this rewatch, I was like, oh yeah, the feather. That's right. Okay. And then also, as it ended, I got it, but
not for nothing, 30 years ago. And this was I get it. It's a feather, but in 1994, this was a big deal to open your movie on like a 3-minute long shot of an animated feather floating around. And it holds up pretty well.
That one does for sure.
I know that it's a simple enough thing. It's just a feather floating around, but the mechanics of it, I was like, this is not a simple thing to animate, especially not in 1994.
Yeah.
And it looks pretty clean. It
does.
Yeah.
The feather looks really, really good. And the visual effects in this movie overall are very, very good. Especially
the fact that it's a oner to open this film. It's a big long oner, and the feather goes from digital floating around and it lands on Tom Hanks's foot and it becomes a practical feather. And it's a pretty seamless transition between the digital feather and the practical feather on Hanks's foot. And like, kudos to the effects team in 1994 for pulling off this opening shot.
Yeah, it looks really good. It does set up the theme, which you don't even know it's the theme, right? But it's a really great bookend to the movie. And there's a lot of really good oners in this. And some of them aren't really that long, but some of them, they're great. Great way to start the movie, to introduce us to Forrest, which the non-traditional kind of structure of this story, I mean, it gets into the story pretty much immediately.
Oh yeah, it goes,
which I love.
Yeah, and it's like, and the framework of Forrest Gump is, for the first 2 acts of the movie, for the first 70%, 75% of the film, is it's a man sitting on a bench telling his life story to whoever is sitting next to him, and it's a bus stop. And so he picks up this feather, he sticks it in a copy of a book of Curious George, and he puts it in the sky, puts the book away, pulls out this box.
I love that Curious George, right? Very much a comparison between him and Curious George.
Oh, sure.
Great little detail. So
absolutely. And this woman sits down next to him. She gets off a bus and she sits down next to him, and he points out her shoes. He says, "Man, those look like nice." Well, first he offers her some chocolates. Hey, would you like a chocolate?
Would you like some chocolate?
This woman, I love this first woman who is not interested at all in talking to Forrest Gump, and he just talks to her anyway. And he starts telling her, he tells her life. My mom always said life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. Again, we're talking theme here. We're dropping
with his mom's theme, right? You never know what you're gonna get, right? Is it there's not really a destiny to it. I want to ask you real quick about his accent. How did you feel about his voice in this? Tom Hanks's.
Listen, coming back to it and trying my best to deprogram my nostalgia brain and trying to just watch it with fresh eyes. I'm sitting here as an actor going like, this voice is such a huge swing. It's such a, and this is coming from a guy who I had 4 movies come out this year, and in 3 of them I speak in a Southern accent.
Right.
I speak and I like to think I have 2 different accents. I have one that I use in the Horizon movies and one that I use in Alien Country, and they're slightly different versions of different accents, I think. But it is when I hear myself speak in those movies, I am like, do I sound stupid? Because I don't know. Like it's obvious that I'm doing a voice, and anybody who knows how I talk, it's like, it's very clear that it's not my voice. But I was thinking, I feel uncomfortable, and my accent that I'm doing is very light and very like simple and it's not a big swing accent. Hanks is taking a big swing on this voice.
Big swing.
Yeah. And I mean, I think there's a reason why the guy got a gold statue. I
totally agree.
I think that like the voice is so much a part of what instantly makes Forrest Gump an interesting character. Whether it's I think that the question of like whether or not the accent is phonetically accurate, like if it's like, oh, is that actually how people from Alabama sound? I'm like, I don't think that that's important. No. I think that nobody sounds like Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump is an anomaly. Forrest Gump is his own thing. And definitely he does have an Alabamian accent. But more importantly, he speaks like Forrest Gump. And I do love that Tom Hanks got most of his direction for the voice from the kid.
Yes. And that's what I was going to point out. The Michael Connor Humphreys, who played young Forrest, because Tom Hanks was like, I don't know how this character should speak. He was kind of doing varying degrees of Southern accents like you're talking about. But once he started hearing that young actor, and he just kind of talked to him and kept talking to him, and it was like, this is how I should speak. It's a pretty cool story that, a young actor like that inspired someone like Tom Hanks, who was like, oh yeah, this is a great, and it pays off for me. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. Almost immediately in this movie, when Hanks picks up the feather and puts it in the book and places it, his mannerisms and the way that he holds his head and his posture and the way you immediately are like, okay, he's doing something here. Like immediately he's giving you so much information. Like, you can see Forrest Gump, the character, immediately before Tom Hanks opens his mouth to speak. And then he opens his mouth to speak. He looks at this woman and says, hello, my name's Forrest Gump. And it's the first line of the movie. And immediately you're like, okay, so, all right. So this is not Tom Hanks from A League of Their Own. This is not Tom Hanks from Turner and Hooch. This is not Tom Hanks from Big or Philadelphia. This is something else. And it's maybe the biggest character swing of his career, maybe outside of the Lady Killers, Which a movie that I liked, but not many people did. But,
I liked The Lady Killers.
Yeah, I love that. Anyway, but this character, I mean, he is so consistent in this movie. It's pretty remarkable. Like watching him on this, and there are 2 scenes that I felt like, I mean, the whole movie, I'm like, this is an amazing character to watch. He plays him extremely well. But I feel like there were 2 scenes that won him the Oscar, and we'll talk about those. But the fact, and you're totally right when he puts it down in his book and he closes it and he's kind of sitting there very, his posture is very straight, which he gets into immediately, right? He talks about, so his character is completely consistent throughout the whole movie, and he's in it the whole time. So
and you hear this little kid speak, and because the kid kind of talks, he has this like, I'm Forrest Gump, and he has this sort of, Mama says stupid is as stupid does, and he's just got this like this
takes
kind
another,
of
like, adds another syllable to things that don't need another syllable.
And so that's what Hanks did. And the story goes that producers were coming to set and watching Hanks's performance and telling Robert Zemeckis it's a disaster.
Yes,
it's like, oh, you've got to stop him. You've got to,
even the DP was like, oh man, is this gonna work? Like, they were all like, I don't know about this. So,
I mean, I'll tell you, the reason why I bring up using accents in the movies that it's like, I'm insecure anytime I have to do a little bit of a voice for a character, because I'm just so, and I do think that the key to it is like, you got to just go for it.
Right.
And if you wind up sounding like Dick Van Dyke in Mary Poppins, oh, well, you got to just go for it. You got to just, you got to, don't hold anything back and just take the plunge. And Hanks,
he did.
Yeah. It's not just about the voice. It's the mannerisms. It's the posture, and everything is informed by the character and by the character's story, because the posture isn't just that his legs and back get straightened out by his braces that he wears as a little boy. It's also his military background. And it's all, it's going to playing football for the University of Alabama. It's all of these things that sort of shape the way that Forrest Gump carries himself. And he notices this woman's shoes, and we are immediately taken back into his childhood. He's trying to think back to his first pair of shoes, and what we're introduced to is that when he was a boy, he had to wear these really cumbersome braces on his legs because he had really bad scoliosis and had a really crooked spine, and
crooked like a politician, right? Is the doctor who is smoking.
He's as crooked as a politician. Well,
smoking in his doctor's office, which I thought was kind of a funny. Also, the bus driver is smoking. The subtlety of the smoking at the beginning of the movie and not smoking at the end of the movie was a really funny addition. Yeah. But anyway, he's telling him, he's got to wear these for a while.
Sally Field, they leave. These men are staring, and I thought this was interesting because back to back, Sally Field tells these, she tells these, what's the matter? You haven't seen a little boy with braces on his legs before? Yeah. And then she asks him, she goes, hey, if the good Lord wanted us all to be the same, he would have given us all braces on our legs. Right. And she's basically saying our being different is what makes us special. But pretty much in the very next scene, she's trying to get him into school, but she tells him, you're no different than anybody else. Just so you know, you're no different than anybody else. And it's this, I don't know if that's an intentional hypocrisy from the screenwriter, or if that's just an oversight. Or
I think the fact that she's saying is that we are all different, so we are all the same. Yeah. Right. Like, or we're all different, so don't treat anybody differently. Right. Kind of. So I see what you're saying for sure. But I do think it is, because I think she's right. Like, listen, we're all different. No two people are the same. So treat everybody with respect and kindness, which is actually she does a really good job, because that's all he does. He just treats everybody pretty much the same, Yeah. So, but I think that's a good point.
Your boy's different, Ms. Gump. Which, like, right after this, I mean, we go right into stuff that we can start just listing off things that I didn't get as a kid, and pretty much
that'd be a long list.
And it's immediate in this scene. So she's trying to get her son into a regular public school. She doesn't want him to have to go to a special school, but his IQ is just under what normal is on this chart. But immediately this like superintendent or this principal is sitting on this desk in this way, talking to her. I was like, I never would have picked up on the body language as a kid, but as an adult, I'm like, oh, it's right there. He's suggesting with his body, hey, your son can't.
The way he looks at her and he's talking, is there a Mr. Gump, Mrs. Gump? Right. Like, he's like,
he's on vacation. Didn't get that as a kid. Didn't get what she was saying. I genuinely thought, as a little kid, I thought, Forrest's dad is on vacation. Yeah. And
I thought that too.
Yeah. The next scene is Forrest sitting outside of his house at night, the boarding house where he lives with his mom. And we can hear animal noises coming from inside the house. I did not know what this was. I genuinely didn't know what that sound was.
I'm pretty sure I asked my parents and they're like, oh, don't worry about
it. I genuinely didn't know what that sound was.
I didn't either. Yeah.
And to be fair, even now as an adult watching it, I'm like, well, that guy's making some insane noises.
Yeah. Yeah, he is. Something wrong with that guy.
Yeah. Like that guy.
Yeah.
I don't know. But we do have this funny little moment where he comes out of the house after, after Sally Field convinces him to let Forrest into school. And he goes, your mama sure does care about your schooling, boy.
Yeah.
And he wipes his forehead off. And then, he goes,
you don't say much, do you? Yeah.
Yeah. And Forrest repeats back to him the
animal.
Yeah.
The weird animal noises.
Yeah. And that's a funny little moment. This movie is hilarious. It's got a really good sense of humor. The screenplay is really funny.
Yep. Balances the humor and the drama very well.
Yeah, but we are, I guess maybe we skipped over a little bit that Forrest and his mom live in a boarding house.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that
is that next?
That's happened. I think because he gets on the bus and everybody's looking at him for his legs, and he meets Jenny, and she, everybody's like, "Oh, seat's taken. Can't sit here." Nobody will let him sit down, which is really sad.
Yeah.
And then Jenny's like, "Oh, you can sit here if you want," and she's this really cute girl, and they immediately become best friends, which is a cute little scene. But then I think they get into the boarding house, and this is kind of the first person that he meets person that he interacts with is Elvis Presley.
Yeah.
He stays in the house and he's doing, shaking his hips and everything with his braces on. And then Elvis is like, oh, show me that one move again, but just slow it down. And, he basically shows Elvis his moves, his hip
famous,
shake and everything.
Kind of the famous moves that he did on the Ed Sullivan show.
Exactly.
Or whatever. Yeah.
And voiced by Kurt Russell, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So Elvis is voiced by Kurt Russell.
Wow.
The actor who it was is someone different, which actually in the background, he looked exactly like Austin Butler. And I was like, this is so weird.
To me, what's crazy is because the way that he's shot is he's in soft focus in the background, and you can't actually make out his features. To me, it just looks exactly like Elvis. Like it looks like they almost digitally went in on the soft focus and just were like, let's just lay over like Elvis's face, but make it soft focus.
And they could.
I don't. It's crazy. Because you don't get a good look at it. And I think this is also the audiences. If you're watching this for a first time, if you imagine yourself watching this in a movie theater in 1994, this is kind of your first introduction to the fact that like this movie is going to be kind of a tour through famous faces and famous events in the back half of the 20th century. And this is the first kind of famous person that we're introduced to. And it's also like this theme of Forrest never really knows who anybody is. He just says, I met this young man, and then we saw that young man on TV doing the moves that I showed him, and it's Elvis Presley. Yeah. And and then he says, and then he died, and it must be tough being a king.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the first taste that we get, of all the people that he meets. The first one is Elvis.
And then he talks about, him and Jenny, they're peas and carrots. We do get introduced to the idea that Forrest doesn't quite, even as an adult, doesn't quite grasp the concept of things like abuse or, sexual. He still thinks as an adult, Jenny had a loving father who was always touching and grabbing
and kissing her.
And we'll put this in another file of things I did not fully understand as a child. Watching this movie, I didn't quite. I guess I got that Jenny was scared of her dad.
Yeah, I got that.
We never see Jenny's father's face. We do see there's a scene where Jenny isn't on the bus to school, and Forrest goes to find her at her house. And she pulls him into a cornfield and says, "Come and pray with me, Forrest." And then they're running from Jenny's dad, and he's carrying a bottle of liquor. And what we see through Forrest's kind of simplified telling is this really sad, really scary story. This really but through Forrest's eyes, it's just like, I just was with my friend praying in this field, and for some reason she was scared of her dad.
And he was there. He was there for her, right? And obviously, he didn't understand what was going on, but he was there. and she always wanted to stay with him, and he would always stay with her because she was nice to him, right? Like she was there for him when nobody else would be there for him. I mean, she genuinely cares about him, especially when they were growing up. And so that, that's how they really get endeared to each other.
Yeah.
And then I can't remember if this was before all of that or not, but Forrest gets bullied. Kids throw rocks at him.
Yeah.
Right. And then, she keeps saying, run, Forrest, run, Forrest. And so he's running with his braces, which I was like, man, this is one of the most iconic scenes from the movie, but also an extremely iconic scene in cinematic history. He's running with his braces on. He can't go very fast. And then as he keeps running, the braces start to break off and actually fall off of his legs while he starts running, which I'm like, that image is, it's very iconic, but it's also done very well in the context of the story.
Again, this movie is so dense with like things with effects and shots that you go, how did they pull that off? Because again, 1994, it's like we're just entering with Jurassic Park and The Abyss and T2, just entering the era of like using more and more visual effects in movies. And this effect, whatever they did, it looks practical and it looks seamless. That this actor is wearing these braces and running, and without the camera cutting, he goes into a sprint, and in slow motion they start to break apart and fly off of his legs. And I just was like, I don't know how they did this. I don't know what they built, what the mechanism was. It looks fantastic.
It does.
It's emotional. It's impactful. It's like you said, it's one of the most iconic scenes of the late 20th century in cinema. Like it is, "Run, Forrest, Run" became a quote and a staple of this film for a reason. This scene, and it's like this scene's like what, 15 minutes into the movie, and
that.
And so he takes off, and that's where we first learn that, wouldn't you know it, little Forrest Gump is actually one of the fastest people alive, and he can run kind of faster than lightning, and he probably could have been an Olympic sprinter if he had wanted to.
Well, I mean, so it cuts to them in high school, and they're still very good friends, and he is still getting bullied, right? And everybody keeps calling him stupid and everything, and then he has to run away from the car. The truck that they're all chasing him in, and it's a great sequence. Which again, actually we haven't touched on this yet, but the music in this movie is pretty iconic. I mean, it's great music that everybody. I mean, we didn't grow up in this era.
Not just the soundtrack from Alan Silvestri, but the needle drops. Yes, there are so many great needle drops.
So many needle drops. And they feel, because of this movie, it feels like that era.
It gives us, it always gives us such a sense of time and place and environment. Like every needle drop in this movie makes me feel like it's the exact year that the movie wants it to be, and like we're in the exact place. It's this weird thing where it's like I've never seen a movie that uses needle drops this well.
No.
Where like they all immediately give me a sense of place, where we're at emotionally in the story, where we're at like in the country's history. Like it's crazy.
It is crazy. And the soundtrack for this movie, all of the songs that they had became one of the top selling albums of that year. And I think of all time for movies, like the fact that it was a compilation of all these, like, and I just remember my parents listening to it, like loving it, because that was their era. Our parents in the 50s, that was their era.
Oh yeah.
And so they loved all the songs, and they would always say, oh my goodness, same thing. Like it takes them back to that time, pretty much exactly in time. So great needle drops in this one, but he's running away from all the guys. He's running. It's a great sequence with a great song. And then he runs onto the field, and a football field, and they're practicing.
It's the Alabama practice squad.
Alabama. It's he's the quarterback throws the ball, and Forrest is right next to the quarterback when he throws the ball, and then he beats the pass to the receiver. And the receiver stops and looks at him. He just gets nailed. And it's Bear Bryant for Alabama. He's coaching that team, and then he gets on Alabama's team, And
well, I love this line. Forrest goes, used to be I ran to get places. I never thought it would take me anywhere.
Yeah.
But and he just accidentally stumbles into a football scholarship at the University of Alabama, and he becomes this all-American kickoff returner.
Yeah,
because he's just so fast that if they can just give this guy the ball, he probably can't learn how to execute any plays, so he can't be like a wideout or a slot receiver or anything.
Nope.
But if they can just hand him the ball on kickoffs and tell him to run,
he'll get a touchdown.
Yeah.
And that was the funniest thing, because they kick the ball off and they don't kick it to him. And so the game is going on and Forrest is just looking off into the distance at nothing.
Yeah.
Just like, no, he doesn't care. He's just sitting there. And then the guy runs with him, runs with the ball to him. And he's like, run, Forrest. And he's like, okay. And he just runs. And he's just running and no one can catch him. Yeah. And this is a detail that I saw and that other people picked up, but his jersey is completely spotless.
Yeah.
Like, because no one tackles him.
Yeah.
So they can't catch him. So
everybody else is covered in mud and grass stains.
He's pristine and he's just like running.
Yeah.
Such a good, I loved that detail and I loved this whole sequence.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So wouldn't you know it? I got to go to college too.
Yeah.
And he goes to the University of Alabama. And while he's at Alabama, Jenny is at an all-girls school. Yes. And so he also goes and visits Jenny. And again, we're sort of doing this whole thing of Jenny and Forrest growing up together. And already when Forrest goes to visit Jenny at her all-girls school, we can see how they're going to have very different lives. They're just going to go in very different directions. Obviously, Jenny is maturing into an adult woman and she wants to be going on dates and she wants to be exploring her sexuality and all of these things that Forrest is just not ever really probably going to be able to do with her. But anyway, he goes and visits her at her all-girls college. We get this scene where he sees that she's making out with a guy in a car, but it looks like she's maybe being attacked or assaulted.
Yeah.
And this is a kind of an interesting detail too, because it's like on some level, even though Forrest says that line about Jenny's dad saying, well, he was always touching her and her sisters, he was a very affectionate man. It seems like on some level he understands that like Jenny has experienced sexual violence. And so whenever he sees anything that looks like Jenny might be getting re-traumatized and he has an opportunity to step in and help her, it's like it's the most active we ever see Forrest get is like he will step in and beat the crap out of whoever,
he makes the choice. He will go after them. And I think you're totally right. Like he understands on some level that because he is trying to protect her.
Yeah.
Almost too much, obviously, throughout the movie. But this is the first instance. He just wails on the guy.
And now we get one of my favorite things that I definitely didn't get when I was 8 years old, or 7 years old watching this as a kid, 8 years old, 10 years old. I don't know at what age I finally understood this, but Jenny decides to see if she's trying to see if she can like invite Forrest to join her as an adult, like, hey, we're adults now. So she tries to have a little intimate moment with him and she takes her bra off in front of him because they're all wet. They were out in a rainstorm. And she lets him sort of feel her up, and Forrest prematurely ejaculates.
I did not get this.
I did not know that that's what was happening when I was a kid.
Another thing that I was like, what's going on? Like, don't worry about it, kid.
Because he sort of, the way that Tom Hanks plays it is it's almost like he just starts to kind of get dizzy or lightheaded.
Because he even says like, oh, I'm dizzy.
He's overstimulated by, he's never been naked with a woman before, let alone the love of his life. And the giveaway in the scene is that he says, I think I ruined your roommate's bathrobe.
This is like, and then you see the roommate, she's awake and she's like, what is going on? Like she knows what just happened.
This is a great moment of comic timing from
I was like, I don't get that. I did not get that totally over my head when I was a kid. So
he splooged into her
So that was the only definitely the other thing that I did not comprehend.
Yeah. So, but in that scene, Jenny does intimate to Forrest that she has a dream of being a singer. She wants to be a singer on a stage. Yes. I think then we go to Forrest's graduation from Alabama. We also get since they win the championship, they go and get to meet the president for the first time. Yeah. And the president is John F. Kennedy.
Yeah. So, and this is this is the first kind of it's almost, I mean, it's kind of like a deep fake, really.
Yeah.
Right. Like they're
again, there's stuff that they're doing in this movie technically that like they're digitally putting Tom Hanks into actual footage of the college football All-American team meeting the president in the 60s.
Yeah.
And they're inserting Tom Hanks into the footage, and it's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's a pretty solid effect.
Yeah. My only problem, maybe not my only problem, but the mouth on these, it definitely, if you look at the mouth, it's like, that's not even close. But for 94, it looks pretty good. But today's standards, even today, they can't get the mouth. People can't get the mouth.
The bodies in space, Tom Hanks being in space with John F. Kennedy, and the film grain, it's a pretty good mapping of these. Yeah.
It looks very much like everything else. Honestly, everything else, even how it looks on his face. The only thing is the mouth, but everything else looks really, really good. And Forrest has drank, about 16 Dr. Peppers, and so you can tell he's really got to go to the bathroom. But Kennedy's like, how does it feel to be an All-American? How do you feel? He's, I gotta pee.
Classic.
And then when Kennedy turns and he's laughing, he's like, I believe he said he had to go pee. I'm like, that looks so good. Like it looks really, really good.
Like you said, the mouths are still a problem. Like we talked about Alien Romulus, like the Ian Holm effect. The biggest problem is the mouth. Like when it doesn't, for whatever reason, that's the toughest part to get.
Yeah.
But this is 1994, and it's a pretty solid effect. Yeah. So he meets the president. We do get to see one more football game, and there's a fun little detail where the first football game that he plays in, they do this thing in the stands where the fans sort of hold up cards that spell out "Go Alabama." And now, in presumably his senior year of college, after playing for 4 or 5 years for the University of Alabama, they hold up signs that say "Go Forrest," and basically, and then they have signs that say "Stop Forrest," because he doesn't know when to stop running. Which is funny, but yeah, he graduates college, and his mom comes and sees him, and we can kind of see that Sally Field is aging, and pretty much immediately he's approached by an Army recruiter who asks him if he's given thought to his future. And Forrest Gump is going to Vietnam. He goes into the military, and he gets on the bus, and we have this repeat the movie does this a lot. It does, it does the repeat of him being bullied as a kid and breaking the braces off of his legs, and then seeing that same scene in high school. We see the scene when he gets on the bus going to school as a little kid, and we see the same scene getting on the bus going to the military.
It's a good mirror, right, to Jenny. I mean, Jenny was nice to him, and he same thing. Can't seat's taken. You can't sit here, and he gets to sit next to Benjamin Buford Blue. Yeah. People call me Bubba, right? Yeah. I'm Forrest. I'm Forrest Gump. People call me Forrest Gump, which is a great. I guess that was ad-libbed. I saw that somewhere that was ad-libbed, but anyway, it's a great line.
Great relationship between these two characters. They sort of understand each other immediately.
Yes. Well, and the line that Lieutenant Dan says is, "You guys twins?" Right, which is a joke, and they're like, "We are not relations."
Yeah, because one of them is white and one of them is black.
I mean, obviously, But the funny thing about that is that the thing that I noticed on this rewatch, Forrest and Bubba are the same person, right? He's a mirror to Forrest. Bubba is a mirror to Forrest, and they're in this section. They're going through the same thing. The only thing that Bubba cares about is shrimping, right? And the only thing that Forrest really cares about is Jenny. Yeah. And so you have this, usually when you have like a subplot or anything, you kind of want to show what could usually you want it to mirror the main character, but in the opposite way. Yeah. And so Bubba on this one is, they're the same person, but Bubba unfortunately has a worse fate, right? He dies. And it goes into this other theme that I noticed as well, because Bubba, says he wants to go home. Yeah. And that really lets, this theme of home is something else that we'll kind of get into later. But it's a really good relationship. And I probably got ahead of myself, but they hit it off immediately. Forrest will listen to Bubba all day long, and all Bubba talks about is shrimping. The first thing he asks him, "You ever been on a real shrimp boat?"
This is a joke I didn't get as a kid. I did not.
I didn't either. I got it today. Or I got it when I watched it.
Didn't get the wordplay. It says, "You ever been on a real shrimp boat?" And Forrest response, "No, but I've been on a real big boat."
Yeah,
and it's just the wordplay of shrimp.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I didn't get that until I watched it this time. Like, oh yeah, yeah.
Great joke. But also, they're both like savants in certain ways. Like we see Forrest being kind of a savant, like that he, for some reason, can just put it together and disassemble his firearm really quickly. Bubba knows everything there is to know about shrimping and the shrimping business. And he, and they both, we can see that they both have valuable skills. Also, Bubba and Forrest are both kind of like ideal soldiers for the military. Just guys who will do what they're told and won't make a fuss, and are capable grunts who can hold a weapon and stand at attention, and will happily spend their afternoon cleaning the floor with their toothbrushes, and and they're kind of ideal in that sense for military service.
And they're both very hopeful. I mean, Forrest is there. He doesn't, obviously we talked about he doesn't really get all the political aspects that are going on, but Bubba is also like, when I get done, I'm going shrimping, like he knows exactly what he wants to do. So they're both extremely positive, which again makes the fact that when Bubba dies just even harder and even sadder, more sad.
For neither Forrest or Bubba, it's not about, oh, we got to eliminate the threat of communism. We got to stamp out. They don't have any concept of what that is. I think both of them are like, well, the military is a way that I can, get some things paid for and covered and have some insurance and security financially. And also I can, this sort of vague concept of patriotic duty, whatever that means to guys like Forrest and Bubba. But before they go to the jungle, Forrest makes one last stop to see Jenny, because he heard that Jenny got That's right. She got a job singing at a club, which is it's like a strip club in Nashville, and he goes to see her singing at this club, and she's singing a Bob Dylan song while naked on stage. But all Forrest sees is that she achieved her dream, and he's just so happy for her. But again, Forrest sees men being grabby with her and touching her in ways that she doesn't like, and kind of assaulting her. And once again, Forrest swoops in and beats the crap out of some guy who's being inappropriate.
Who deserved it, by the way.
Oh yeah. This was one scene where I'm like, hey Jenny, cut him some slack.
This was one like, listen, I get it when you were in college, like it just seems like you were
you were on a date with that guy and he beat up your date.
That was, he misunderstood that. He's not misunderstanding what's going on. The guy deserved it. So
and she's mad at the guy too. I think that she's mad at Forrest because maybe he messes up her job, like that she's gonna lose her job at the club. But anyway, Forrest follows her out of the club, and she says, I got to get out of here, and she's hitchhiking, and he lets her know that he's going to Vietnam. And again, we kind of see that Forrest doesn't have a grasp on the situation, because he goes, so bye Jenny, they sending me to Vietnam. It's this whole other country. He doesn't really know anything about what's happening, but we can see from Jenny's response that she does know. What
she
that
gets
means.
It. And before this happened, this is when she starts getting suicidal. She gets on the bridge. She's like, well, what would happen if I jumped off? Do you think I could fly? Right. She says something to that effect. And he gets that situation, like, no, you can't do that, which I thought was actually, I really like that detail. And then that's when she's like, Forrest, you stay away from me, right? Like, just stay away. I'm bad for you. And then they have that whole exchange where he's like, I'm going to Vietnam. And then she's the one who tells him, listen, if you're ever in trouble, just run. Don't think about anything. Just run and get out of there. Because she understands the gravity of the situation. So again, the passive protagonist eventually does listen to her. But
is this also the scene where she first tells him that he doesn't know what love is?
I think it is. Yeah. I think
it's here on this bridge that he says something like, I love you, because she's like, why do you always do that stuff? Why do you always swoop it? And he's like, well, I love you. She goes, you don't know what love is.
And it's downplayed because it's not focused on very much, but I think you're right. I think this is the first time that he says that he loves her. Yeah. Which is great, because as it goes on, it escalates in the best possible way. But she leaves, he goes to Vietnam, and again, the music, great needle drop.
We got obviously Creedence Clearwater is always going to be the needle
Vietnam.
drop to tell people that in a movie we're going to Vietnam. Yeah. But again, it's like in this movie, it just drops us right in. And it almost feels so much of this movie, so much of the magic of this movie is that you're inserting these fictional characters into these real events and they feel seamlessly woven in. But even this thing, it feels like this first shot of Forrest and Bubba on this helicopter, it feels like we're dropping them into famous movies that we've seen. Like it feels like we're dropping Forrest and Bubba into like Apocalypse Now or Full Metal
Platoon
Jacket. Full Metal Jacket or Platoon. And like it feels like they're like these weird fish, they don't belong in this, so much of Forrest Gump is stitching these fictional characters into these pop culture pieces and into these historical events.
And I think too, the funny thing about this sequence, especially like, because I felt that same way. I'm like, this feels like we've just dropped into a movie. It feels very much like that, which I think is kind of intentional. Like it's almost a little cliched in some ways, but it's, again, it feels intentional. Like, I mean, they're in Vietnam, right? And the way that he holds his gun, the way that everything looks, but that was also a big part of that time, right? Like that, it really fits with the movie. And I loved the look of it, in that period. But yeah, you really feel like Forrest is dropped off in Apocalypse Now or Full Metal Jacket, like you said.
Yeah. And he and Bubba very clearly stand out and don't really see. And you're right. It's like, it feels like we're on a movie set or something. Like it feels, but I do think that it's intentional, but this is another one of those things of like how much movie is in this movie. Like there's just so much here that's so impressive that they had to do, like just this one shot of them on a helicopter or this like tracking shot of the camp that they live in, of just showing the bigness of it, the barbecue and all the, and the, and the latrines and everything. And then we're introduced to Lieutenant Dan, it's
Gary Sinise.
And immediately this guy is, he's just like this larger than life character who, his whole entire life his destiny has been to be a high ranking officer in the United States military and to die in a war.
Yes. And that's been his, what he says, he's had an ancestor die in every American war, and it goes through the civil or the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, the World War I, World War II.
I love when this movie does this, like how like when they show Forrest's namesake, his ancestor, the guy that started the Ku Klux Klan, it's Tom Hanks in makeup, like being like the ancestor.
Well, and when they show Gary Sinise, they superimpose him into they superimpose Tom Cruise into Birth of a Nation.
Which we didn't even talk about that. No. But but they do this little montage where they show Gary Sinise in all of these different like revolutionary wars. He's dying in all these different wars. He dies in World War II and World War I and the Civil War and the Revolutionary War. And it's great.
Very funny. Yeah, that's a great scene. But this is it's a great setup because again, Lieutenant Dan is very much about destiny. He is about, I have a destiny, and he's the type of character that is different than Forrest's mom, in that she thinks, you never know what you're going to get. He feels like he knows exactly what he's going to get. And he has great points. So
he knows who he is in the world, what he's supposed to do. And it's not like he's actively trying to die, but he has embraced that destiny. That my destiny leads me to a glorious death on the field of battle at some point. And we have this really well done Vietnam sequence that feels like it could be its own movie. These two guys in the jungle. It feels like you could do a whole own movie about that. And I'll tell you one joke that I didn't ever get as a kid, and watching it on this pass, I still don't get it, is when he says some of the finest men in America were in that thing, and he goes, there was Cleveland
from Detroit,
which that's Cleveland from Detroit. Those are just different places. There's the other guy from these two places aren't the same. But then he goes, and then there was Tex. Well, I don't remember where Tex came from. And I think the joke is supposed to be that Tex obviously comes from Texas. The problem is that the other two guys have names that aren't the places that they're from. So I'm like, Tex could be literally from anywhere, and maybe that's the joke. Is that even though his name is Tex, he's not necessarily from? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good point, because maybe there is a deeper meaning to it, that like there are a lot of kids from a lot of different parts of the country, and I mean it really I think it does go in deeper into the fact that like nobody really liked the Vietnam War, right? Like there was a huge protest against it, but the people who served in it were great people, and a lot of times they kind of go unnoticed, especially veterans, right? Like from that time period, there's been a lot of movies about veterans from the Vietnam War who just kind of seem to be left behind. So you have Cleveland from Detroit. It's
Dallas from somewhere that's not Dallas.
And so like there's all these great kids, but they're kind of, nobody really knows who they are really. I
think it's like Dallas from Phoenix or something.
Yeah,
it's like there's Dallas from Phoenix, Cleveland from Detroit, and Tex. I don't know where Tex is from. And I remember always laughing at that growing up. Yeah. But even as a kid, I was like, I'm not sure I get it. And as an adult, I'm even more confused, because I'm like, but the first two guys, their names weren't the places that their names were a place, but then the place they were from wasn't that place. And now he doesn't know where Tex is from, but like, I always thought the implication, I don't know. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway,
maybe there is. If anybody knows, let us know. That'd be really interesting to find out. But
I still don't get that joke. So but I know that it's meant to be a joke. Again, this is one of those things where people feel like the movie is kind of mythologizing or lionizing or whitewashing over something really serious, because Forrest's version of Vietnam there's a lot of jokes, and it's, like he was always saying, get down and shut up, and shut up, and it's like, it's kind of played for laughs. But I don't think that that's because the filmmakers don't take it seriously. I think it's because our storyteller just has a way of telling. He never, he just tells. He sees things with a kind of innocence that.
And I think too, the fact that there's these jokes, it's kind of lighthearted in the beginning, but then all of a sudden, when the rain stops and they get shot at, you have this huge juxtaposition where it gets really serious. And then there's the whole sequence. The rain stops, all the the firefighting starts. And they have to run, right? So Forrest remembers what Kenny says, and he runs.
Technically, this battle sequence is crazy.
Like, it's really good.
It's so well executed. Yeah. It's so well shot. It's so well choreographed. It's like, and again, this is just like one little set piece in this massive movie, and they treat it like they're making a war epic for this little 5 minute long war set piece. And this is why this movie went so massively over budget, is like every little section of the movie was its own huge epic set piece that they had to art direct, and that's the production design in this movie, the costume design, everything
really good.
Looks so spot on. And this sequence is crazy. And basically what happens, without Forrest even realizing it, is we witness him becoming a war hero. He runs out of this area, and he realizes, I left Bubba, and he keeps going back to find his best friend. But every time he goes back, he finds somebody else, and he keeps running guys out of there. And again, we go back to Forrest being kind of almost supernaturally strong, and the fact that he's an amazing runner, that he's very fast. So he's running back and forth using his speed to run these guys out of the jungle.
And he's, it goes into, again, him being kind of altruistic, where he's looking for Bubba. He was his best good friend, right? That he's looking for Bubba, but he's not going to leave these guys just there to die. So he helps every single one of his, as many as he can. He helps his whole platoon to get out of there. And he eventually does, he finds Lieutenant Dan, and Lieutenant Dan is calling in an airstrike, and, Forrest is trying to get him out, and he's telling him not to save him, just leave him here, right? Leave him there. And he goes and puts him on the beach with everybody else, and Lieutenant Dan is pissed. He's like really frustrated. Like, no, you need to leave me out there. Again, going into the destiny. Like, I'm supposed to die out there. Don't worry about me.
Yeah,
and,
leave me with my men. Let me. Yeah.
Yeah, and Forrest, which again, this pays off really well in the end, but he's very, very frustrated, which lingers for a long time. But he's like, I gotta find Bubba. Right? He goes back, he finds Bubba. Bubba is obviously not gonna make it. He's got, you don't really see what's going on, but he's got something in his gut. It looks like he's almost holding his insides. And
he's trying to conceal it. He's like put it like a leaf over it, and he's telling Forrest, "I'm okay." Forrest looks, and it's really clear that Bubba's been mortally wounded. But Forrest runs Bubba out of there. It's the last guy that he saves, and they do have this just absolutely heartbreaking exchange on this.
Yeah. Which is where I think, it's lighthearted, but this scene, it's
devastating.
Really sad. Like, it's even making me like tear up right now because you have this innocent guy who is Bubba, who is played really phenomenally well by the actor. And he's there and all this, he's like, "Hey, Forrest." He's like, "Hey, Bubba." And he's like, they have this really innocent conversation. But it's really heartbreaking. And then he says, "Why did this happen?" And that really lets Forrest know, like, this is when he really thinks, like, yeah, why did we do this? So it does take it seriously. And Forrest does, I think, realize, like, he's still going to do it, but he kind of questions, like, well, why did we do this? It doesn't really
make sense. Great line. Why'd this happen? Yeah. Why'd this happen? McKelty Williams is the actor that plays Bubba. Yes. And Williamson is the actor who plays Bubba. And it's a fantastic performance, but also just this line of like, why'd this happen? And all Forrest knows is you got shot. It's just a thing that you got. That's why. But his question is like, no, I mean, like, why? I just wanted to go home and and then he does look at him. He goes, then Bubba said something I'll never forget, and it's that I want to go home. And it's so, but I love the way that this is written into the screenplay, because then we cut away from that beach and we go back to him on the bench, and he just says, Bubba wanted to start his own shrimping business with me, but instead he just died right there on that beach. Yeah. And that's all I have to say about that. And that's kind of a Forrest-ism that we come to find is when Forrest gets a little emotionally overwhelmed, when there's something that is almost too emotionally difficult for him to process, he just says, that's all I have to say about that. Yeah.
And he and this goes into the home theme that I kind of saw on this rewatch. Bubba just wants to go home. He obviously seemed to have a good home life. Forrest has a good home life. But Lieutenant Dan didn't want to go home, right? He wanted to stay there. And then you also have Jenny who had a horrible home life. So, and this isn't a huge theme, but this was one that I was like, wow, this home aspect of this movie was really interesting. That home to Forrest is safe, and he lives in his childhood home. His whole life he's there. At the end of the movie, but that's safe to him. And Jenny really never had a safe home, and home was obviously safe to Bubba too, but he didn't get to go back home. So
I think for Jenny, it's conflicted though, because like the only place that she actually has safety and home is anywhere Forrest is with Forrest. Yes. And if that's in Alabama, then that's where she'll be. But also her childhood home where she, where her trauma began is there.
Yeah. Well, and she feels at home in Forrest's home, in his physical home. Yeah. But she feels home with him. So that, his home is a safe place for her, but it's also just a safe place in general for the movie. Anyway, I just thought that was a really cool theme in the movie, a really cool aspect that they kind of put in. Yeah. And it hit really home when he does say, I want to go home. And I was like, oh man, it really just broke my heart.
It's just it's just a really powerful line to have a character who clearly has a lot to say about everything say, that's all I have to say about that. Yeah. Because he has, it hits home. Yeah. He talks, to anyone who will listen extensively about his life. And anyway, he moves right on he gets home from the war, and he's in Vietnam. He's in the hospital.
And he got shot.
Yeah.
He got shot.
Yeah. It was a bullet, wasn't it? Jumped up and bit you.
Bit you?
And so now we're in the sort of VA hospital in Vietnam with people recovering, and Forrest is in a hospital bed right next to Lieutenant Dan, and this is where we find out that Lieutenant Dan Taylor now no longer has any legs.
Yeah.
And this is this is an effect that this movie did that was revolutionary in 1994, and there is not a thing about this effect that has aged poorly.
No.
And this is a pretty common effect these days. It's not that impressive of an effect in 2024. Yeah. In 1994, this had never been done before, and it still looks fantastic. The way that they are pulling this off, and the performance from Gary Sinise to sell this is so impressive.
They do so many great things. So not in this scene, but later on when he falls out of his wheelchair and he's moving around, they have a table right there. And so his legs move across where the table is. So like if he had legs, they would have hit the table. They didn't have the table when they filmed it. They just added it in later, but it adds that unconscious thing that you see that, he doesn't have legs. And also when he flips his legs over the boat, they actually cut out a piece of the boat so that his legs could just go through that section. Right. So he didn't have to lift them all up. Anyway, it's those little things that they add that make it feel, this actor doesn't have legs when he in reality does.
Yeah. Even the shot later on in the film where the camera goes from Gary Sinise's face and pans down to his pant leg and him touching his titanium leg, I was like, that was an unbroken tilt from his face down to his shin, and he lifted up the pant leg, and it was and I'm like, well, how'd they do that? Like, how'd they swap out Gary Sinise's real leg for a titanium leg? Like, like there are technically this movie is full of wizardry and cool things, but we can tell this is where we start to see that how utterly wrecked Lieutenant Dan's sense of his place in the universe is because Forrest pulled him out of that jungle. Because Forrest saved his life, he no longer feels like he has any meaning or utility. He has no purpose. And in the VA, we find that Forrest starts to play ping pong and learns how to, and he's a natural at it. He's great at it. But we have this fantastic scene where Lieutenant Dan pulls him out of bed one night in the middle of the night and lets him know, hey man, you robbed me of my destiny. You had no right to do that. And there's this,
he says, do you have any idea what it's like to not be able to use your legs? And Forrest says, yes, I do. Right. And it's like, Lieutenant Dan thinks he's being funny, but he really does. He actually has empathy in that situation because he couldn't use his legs, which I still think is a great, the scene overall is great because he's also driving home the fact that I had a destiny. And he couldn't fulfill it.
Well, and there's this great exchange where, Lieutenant Dan is a person who knows exactly. We talked about this. When we meet him when his first character is first introduced, he is a character who knows exactly who he is.
Yeah.
Exactly what his purpose in the world is, and is sure of his destiny. He says this to Forrest. He says, I was Lieutenant Dan Taylor, and you robbed that from, you took that away from me. And Forrest's response is, you cheated me. And Forrest's response is, you're still Lieutenant Dan Taylor.
Yeah.
And saying I didn't take anything away. You don't have legs now, but you're still my friend, Lieutenant Dan. And I'm glad that you're alive. But
it is funny because it's a very childlike statement because it's coming from Forrest. You still are. But the meaning behind it, you still are. Everything that you just said. Yeah. It's a great double meaning in that.
It's I love that exchange where he's just he's like, no, I know, because I think this happens in life too. Things will happen where people will lose something massive. Someone really close to them will die, or a relationship will end, or they'll lose their job or something. And all of a sudden this sense of self is incredibly wounded. This I don't know who I am anymore if I don't have that thing. I was kind of relying on that thing as my purpose. Parents they'll define themselves as taking care of this child, and if they lose a child, it can be really damaging to identity of I don't know who I am if I'm not the person who takes care of this child. And that statement of you're still you, even though you've lost this thing that you were using to define yourself, to give yourself a sense of identity, a sense of home, a sense of being. Without that thing, you're still you. And the rest of Lieutenant Dan's journey in the movie is figuring out how to and be grateful for the gift of still being alive, and understand that there's more to him than this vague idea of the destiny he thought he was supposed to fulfill.
Yeah. No, he's an amazing character. He's written very well, and Gary Sinise plays him extremely well. He was nominated for an Academy Award, which I think is very deserving.
I think it's safe to say this is a career best for Gary Sinise. I don't think so. Unfortunately, I don't think that Gary Sinise ever did anything better than Lieutenant Dan.
I don't think so. He's a great actor, though. He does really well in all the things he does. But this is by far his best, and it's his best role. But I think also this role really changed him as a person. Gary Sinise as a person, he went to research it at the VA and stuff like that, and he would talk to veterans, and he actually started a foundation for wounded veterans, and he's done a ton of really good stuff for the veterans who've served this country. And I think it's pretty cool just to hear that story about how this role actually changed him as a person. Is a cool extra thing that we get from this movie. It's a pretty cool story that you can look it up, but I think it's pretty cool he did that. So now we go into the ping ponging section of Forrest Gump's life. Forrest Gump, because he becomes so good at ping pong in the hospital, he becomes kind of he gets on the All-American ping pong team, and he starts going around performing at different VA hospitals on behalf of the military, and he even gets to go to China and play. But this is another. Man, the visual effects in this movie, 1994, the amount of effect shots in this movie are staggering. It's over, like it's insane how many effect shots there are, and it's also crazy how seamless so many of them are. From that opening shot of the feather seamlessly blending from digital to practical, pretty much I'd say almost 100% of the ping pong in this movie is digital. It's a digital ping pong ball. And I know that seems like a simple effect, but there's a lot of ping pong in this in this sequence. There's a lot. It's pulled off seamlessly. It does not, you don't clock that it's fake. The only reason you know that it's fake is because the filmmakers tell you it is in featurettes and stuff. And also because you're like, there's no way that Tom Hanks got that good at ping pong for this movie. But there's nothing that gives away that this is a visual effect. It's seamless. It looks really good. And it's a fun little sequence that doesn't, it's just funny. He also never blinks. One of the things, one of the reasons why he's so good at it is because they tell him never take your eye off the ball. So he doesn't blink, and all he does is watch it. So whenever he's playing, it's a very simple thing for Forrest to do. Yep. So it's a funny little thing, but this is what gets him on what's it called? The Dick Cavett show.
The Dick Cavett show, and he's on there with John Lennon.
John Lennon. Yeah. And they come up with the song. Oh god, what's the song now?
Imagine. Again, this is Forrest Gump, this fictional character, accidentally sort of inspiring all this stuff. He's explaining to Dick Cavett and John Lennon what life is like in communist China, and he's talking about how people don't have religion or possessions, and you can see John Lennon thinking up the idea for the lyrics to the song Imagine in this interview. And again, this is another like deep fake kind of technology of blending Tom Hanks into footage that he wasn't actually in. And again, from a visual standpoint, outside of the mouths, it's pretty
good. I think this might be the voice in this one is a little bit off. But it really looks good. He even, John Lennon even like goes down in front of Forrest and comes back up, and it's just like it's a nice little trick that like it puts him in that place. I mean, in the whole conversation, the way that it goes back and forth is done really, really well. You really like when I was a kid, I was like, oh, is this real? Like, and
again, really like just the density of this movie, like the amount of stuff that it's just like so many things that they're like, how many things in pop culture and in history can we have Forrest Gump not only just being present for, but accidentally like maybe being responsible for, influencing, like without knowing it. It's great. Anyway, He leaves the studio at the Dick Cavett show, and there's Lieutenant Dan Taylor. They're in New York City, and Lieutenant Dan wants to confront him about the fact that he was given a Medal of Honor, which by the way, we missed the scene where LBJ gave him a Medal of Honor. He gets to meet the president again, and he shows LBJ his butt. And again, we have footage that Tom Hanks see that. And it's, instead of having an actor play LBJ, it's actually LBJ, and they've digitally superimposed Tom Hanks into footage with LBJ. And like, it's insane how many times he meets the president before the movie's over.
Well, I can't. Is it this one? I think he's in this. Was like, I got to go to the White House again and meet the president again.
Yeah,
he's done all these amazing things, and then so, I can't remember if it's this one or when he went. With,
maybe when he meets Nixon. Yeah,
Nixon. It's one of those two.
Yeah,
it's hilarious.
But anyway, he winds up meeting up with Lieutenant Dan, and Lieutenant Dan is obviously very mad at him, but they wind up hanging out and spending the holidays together. It's around Christmas time, and so Gump stays in New York and hangs out with Lieutenant Dan for Christmas and New Year's. And
you know what? We totally forgot a big part. Oh wait, he gets the Medal of Honor for. So
did we forget the DC part?
Yeah, the DC.
Oh, the whole DC part. This is a huge part. Yeah,
this is actually a really great part.
Yeah.
So he goes to he accidentally gets pulled into the anti-war march, at the Pentagon, and he goes and he's talking with Abby Hoffman.
Abby, and this is someone I did not know who this person was when I was a kid. Had no idea. I thought that this was just a character that the movie had created, but Abby Hoffman is a famous activist, and again, this is when people say like that the movie doesn't have a political view. I'm like, no, it's putting that it's all there. And maybe instead of Abby Hoffman, you could have had like Malcolm X or something, or but I think at this point Malcolm X was already dead, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, Abby Hoffman is on stage speaking and
swearing
and swearing, and Forrest Gump gets up to talk about his experience in the war, and some general comes and unplugs all the microphones, so we don't actually get to hear Forrest's perspective. But when we do plug it back in, we hear him say, "And that's all I have to say about that."
Which actually, they had something written. Did you know this?
What is it?
They had something written, and what he says is sometimes when people go to Vietnam, they go home to their mamas without any legs. Sometimes they don't go home at all. That's a bad thing. That's all I have to say about that, which is actually pretty poignant.
Yeah.
Like, when you think about it, like, oh, wow, it's very simple.
That's great.
It's very personal. I mean, I'm glad that they didn't say it, because it just it kind of goes into it that, he must have said something pretty good, because it actually makes Abby Hoffman, like, he's like crying. Right.
Yeah.
But it's true. And it's a bad thing, so good speech. I like this whole scene that, he obviously affected the people around him, but nobody could hear him. And then when he's on stage, you hear this voice saying, Forrest, Forrest. And he runs out, another very iconic moment. In the infinity pool, or
the reflecting pool in front of the Washington Monument. Jenny runs into the pool because she sees him out of this giant crowd.
Yeah, and this huge crowd, which again, very good VFX for this. He runs out, they run into the pool together, they meet, and then everybody cheers. Like, all so excited. And me as the audience, even watching it this time, I'm like, oh, that's so awesome.
It's an amazing image. Forrest in full, military dress gear. And Jenny looks like Jenny's a full blown hippie at this point. Yes. She's been hitchhiking around the country and doing acid. And she probably went to Woodstock, and they probably even shot a scene of Robin Wright at Woodstock. And they just were like, we don't have time to fit it in there, but, and again, this is this rally that he speaks at with Abby Hoffman is a real thing. Yes. And this is a real event so they're actually basing this off of a real event, and they're just inserting him in. And Jenny and Forrest, she wants to introduce him to her friends, and they start walking around the nation's capital, but they go to a Black Panther event. And, and at this event, Forrest witnesses. There's this really funny scene where there's this Black Panther trying to explain Black Panther, ideology to Forrest, but all he sees is that Jenny's boyfriend slaps her. And we know at this point in the movie that Forrest will not stand anybody touching his girl in that way. And so he takes out her boyfriend, beats the crap out of him. and they get kicked out of the Black Panther party.
Yeah.
And Tom Hanks has a great line where he says,
again, though, yeah, sorry, you go ahead.
Sorry, I had a fight and ruined your Black Panther party.
Yeah, and everybody's mad at him. Yeah. But again, this dude deserved it.
Mm-hmm.
That guy's not good for Jenny.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that, he has that she does appreciate him at least standing up for her, but she goes back with that guy,
Well, and so this is one of those things that people criticize her character for.
Yeah.
Is the fact that that she's always with these terrible guys and Forrest is there being the good guy, and how come she, but I'm like, this is the adult themes of the movie that Forrest, as the narrator, doesn't have the aptitude to sort of wrestle with, is the reality of how abuse dynamics work and how, trauma reenactment and how trauma plays on people. The way that Jenny moves through her story is how a lot of people who experienced heavy abuse as children move through their lives. Is like, they often go into situations where they are abused again because there's a familiarity there, or they pass on the abuse and they become the abuser. But like these things, like this, her being in this abusive relationship with this guy and then trying to explain to Forrest, no, he's not always like that. And he actually really does care about me. And he's actually really kind. Yeah. For us in the audience, it's like, get out of there. But in a real world sense, this is how it is when you have a loved one that is in an abusive relationship and you're on the outside of it and you're looking at it and going, why are you doing that?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, the actual psychological dynamics of it make it really hard for people to get out of those situations, especially a person like Jenny, who her sense of self-worth and she doesn't have very high, self-esteem or a very strong sense of self-worth. She's kind of been beat down by life in many ways. So any person who's willing to just like be with her, even if they're not always so nice to her, feels like more than she thinks she deserves. And so it's not so much that Jenny just like sucks and is really mean to Forrest. It's that Jenny doesn't really think much of herself and doesn't have a very strong, sense of self.
Exactly. Yeah. So then it all, all the ping pong stuff happens. He goes, sees John Lennon, and then he goes and meets up with Lieutenant Dan, and they're in New York, and they seem to stay together for a while.
Yeah, I think they're like hanging out for a few weeks, it feels like,
Yeah.
But I really like this sequence because this is where we really see the friendship of Lieutenant Dan and Forrest Gump beginning to bud. And we see this really nice moment where I love this camera shot of New Year's, everyone counting down in this bar, and Zemeckis has the camera panned down to Lieutenant Dan, who's just sitting and staring kind of into the void as confetti rains all over his hair. And Gary Sinise has this really disaffected, kind of lost look on his face. And then we go to his apartment later that night, and Gary Sinise has invited these women over to hang out with him and Gump, and Forrest just he's a one woman guy. He's only got eyes for Jenny. He only wants Jenny, and he throws this woman off, and she calls Forrest stupid, and both the women call him stupid, and that causes Lieutenant Dan to say,
he gets really upset. And this is the first time that Lieutenant Dan, I mean, at least he shows some sort of affection for Forrest. I think it's he doesn't like to be called. He doesn't like to be called crippled or anything like that, right? And he doesn't want people calling Forrest anything because he knows who Forrest is. So this is kind of not really the turning point for him, but this is like the first real emotion that he has for Forrest. Well, and he really defends him.
This is also, without being able to say thank you for saving my life.
Yeah.
Dan understands that Forrest is an innately good person,
right?
And he likes spending time with Forrest, and he feels he doesn't feel judged by Forrest. Forrest doesn't look at him like he's a failure or like he's pathetic. Forrest looks at him with a lot of respect, actually. Forrest calls him sir still because he still regards him as his superior officer. And so Dan does have a lot of affection for Forrest without being able to really say it. In fact, earlier Forrest tells him that he wants to buy a a shrimping boat, you know, a shrimp boat once he gets some money. And Lieutenant Dan says kind of jokingly, now hear this, you know, if this guy ever is the captain of a shrimp boat, I'll be your first mate, almost making fun of him, but he means it.
Yeah. And he's a man of his word.
Yeah, he's a man of his word. So anyway, they have this nice moment in New York. And that's when Forrest gets told that he's discharged from the army in the next scene.
Yeah.
And that means he gets to go home and he gets to go see his mama. And so goes home and finds out that, you know, all this stuff has come from his professional ping pong playing. Yeah. And he had this opportunity to do a sponsorship to take a brand deal for $25,000. And he, you know, if he endorses this paddle and everything, and he does it, and he uses that $25,000 to launch his shrimp boat enterprise.
Yeah.
And that's how we get into the shrimp boat era of Forrest's life.
Yeah. He gets so he buys a boat, and then he goes out and he tries to get shrimp, but he's very unsuccessful. He doesn't seem to know how to make it work, but he keeps at it. And then, you know, I'm trying to remember the sequence. He somehow sees Lieutenant Dan sees that he's a shrimp boat captain. So a man of his word, he comes.
Yeah, I think he writes him a letter. Because he goes, "What are you doing here?" And he goes, "You wrote me a letter, you idiot." One of the best scenes in the movie is, you know, Forrest, who's kind of down on his luck and he's not having a lot of success, seeing his friend Lieutenant Dan on the docks, who said, "I told you I'd come down here and be your first mate." And it's this great scene where Tom Hanks just jumps out of the moving boat.
And he's waving while he jumps.
And just swims over to see Lieutenant Dan. And then while they're talking, his boat crashes into a dock behind them. Which also the physics of that, I'm pretty sure the physics of this don't make sense. I'm pretty sure his boat went off the other direction, and then the continuity is like somehow the boat comes around.
It turned around. There was nobody manning it. So
but they become a shrimp boat duo in Bayou La Battery, Alabama. And you know,
Dan he's got feelings. We got to go here, we got to go there, but still
that's where we're gonna find those shrimp, my boy.
Yeah.
I love Lieutenant Dan in this sequence. Like how enthusiastically he embraces the life of being like a pirate, just being like a guy on a boat out at sea, just, you know,
well, and this actually this sequence kind of brings up a lot of religion, or there's a religious aspect in this part, which I thought was very interesting. And I mean, I wonder what your take was, though.
There's a religious theme throughout the entire movie.
Yes, whole there is.
Of destiny versus, you know, like, there's, I mean, when he breaks his braces as a little kid, he says, you know, some people think that miracles don't happen every day. Well, let me tell you, they do. Then, you know, Lieutenant Dan is a guy who had a really strong sense of purpose and destiny. He lost it in the war. He has this conversation with Gump in New York about how, you know, the crippled vets down at the VA are always talking about Jesus this and Jesus that, but he doesn't believe in Jesus because look at my life, you know, my life's been cast aside. Forrest is trying to, you know, pray for something to happen. And Lieutenant Dan says, "Where's this God of yours?" And it's sort of this idea of like, come on, man, you're out down at the church praying every week. How come God hasn't shown up? And then Forrest says, "Well, God showed up just then." And this storm happens. Great sequence. Again, the movie is so dense. They do a whole like crazy storm sequence on a boat that looks like I just am like everything that goes into this movie. And Gary Sinise up in this crow's nest, screaming into this storm,
screaming at God.
Is so amazing. We're gonna have a showdown. You and me. It's like, it's so great, and it's such a great performance. And it's sort of this moment where like Lieutenant Dan's like, "Kill me if you can." It's very you know, like I think
I think in this moment he kind of finds, and I think Forrest talks about it, right? He finds a new purpose. But he really kind of is you know, well, you didn't kill me there. So kill me now or I'm going to keep going. And they, you know, I guess this was a big storm back in the day, but
It's a real hurricane that really happened.
Mm-hmm.
And but they use this again, real thing from real history. And what happens is all of the fishing boats are out of commission after the hurricane, and the only one that survives is the Jenny.
Yeah.
And so
things go well from there.
Yeah, and Forrest and Lieutenant Dan wind up launching a multi-million-dollar enterprise called Bubba Gump Shrimp.
Bubba Gump Shrimp.
And Lieutenant Dan has his life changed by being willing to be Forrest's first mate, and by having this showdown with God. This doesn't rub me the wrong way as a person who's not religious or anything. It seems right in line with the themes that the screenplay has been telling. It doesn't seem overly preachy or like it's advocating for one denomination over another or anything. It's more just in line with this idea of like Lieutenant Dan felt Dan Taylor felt directionless and purposeless. Right. And I love the moment where it's such a beautiful moment of screenwriting where, you know, Dan and Forrest have been doing well. They've been making money. Their business has been taken off. And Dan is just sitting on the edge of the boat one day and he just says, "Hey, Forrest, I never thanked you for saving my life."
Yeah.
And then he just jumps into the water and he doesn't actually say thank you. He just says, "I never thanked you for saving my life." But he just lets him know, like in his way, you know, you're probably the best friend I have, and thank you so much. And I wouldn't have the life I have today if it weren't for you. And there's this beautiful shot of him swimming out into the ocean, and
it is beautiful. And I do love it because all he says is, "I think he found God in that moment," which again, I feel like, this is very appropriate for the situation. It's not being overly preachy.
Made his peace with God. That he was
yes, thank you. Made his peace with God. Which is really, it really is. His character arc is done for the most part. Lieutenant Dan, you know, he made his peace with God. He has learned that, you know what, I have a new destiny, whatever he believes, you know. So it's a really well done sequence. Really, I enjoyed it too. It was great.
Yeah, so at this point, we've really got 3 characters left in Forrest's life that you know, like that we're following. So like, we lost Bubba. We're pretty much done with the Lieutenant Dan arc, and now we've got Mama and Forrest and Jenny. Forrest, while, you know, manning one of his Bubba Gump shrimp boats, gets word that his mama's sick. And I love this too, that Tom Hanks just gets up there. It looks like they're in the middle of a river or in the ocean, and he just jumps off the boat and just swims to shore
and runs home. Apparently, they make it look like he just ran home.
And just runs home to see his mama. And we get one more scene with Sally Field, and then Mama dies of the cancer. And and
great scene, great ending for Sally Field. She does a great job in this.
And it's you know,
she reiterates though, you know, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. So the opposition to Lieutenant Dan.
And this movie does all these mirroring things because we have this scene of Mama in bed in the house in Alabama, and later on we mirror that with Jenny in bed. And we do the movie does all of these sort of rhyming things in Forrest's life. But now Forrest is back in Alabama. He's inherited his mother's house, and he's found out that Bubba Gump, you know, Lieutenant Dan invested a lot of his money from Bubba Gump into Macintosh. And again, just Forrest Gump being involved in so many things in the 20th century. He invests like $175,000 into Macintosh and becomes a multi-millionaire.
Plus on top of Bubba Gump being so successful. So
and so he realizes
more money than David Crockett.
Yep. And I also love this scene where like it cuts to him telling this part of the story on the park bench, and this guy, when he realizes, oh, so you're telling me you're the founder of Bubba Gump Shrimp, that's when he realized, oh, you're full of it, dude. And he gets up and walks away, and then then Forrest asks the woman who remains, would you like to see what Lieutenant Dan looks like? And she goes, yeah. And he pulls out a copy of Fortune 500
with him and Lieutenant Dan on the cover,
Fortune magazine, and just goes, yeah, that's him right there. And she realizes like, oh, you really are.
Like, oh, you're not lying.
Yeah, you're not lying at all. Like, that's you and Lieutenant Dan. But I like it because this movie's like Big Fish, except for everything that Forrest is saying actually happened. The way that he's saying it. But so anyway, he realizes he doesn't really have to work for a living anymore, and he just is back in Alabama, and he's cutting grass at the University of Alabama, and at it for free, and he just likes the riding mower because he's probably on the autism spectrum, and he just enjoys riding his mower.
He really loves what he does.
Yeah,
which he's very happy. But he does, he says he keeps thinking about Jenny, and you see, which I thought this was really good, because he's looking out his front porch, or whatever, and he sees Jenny walking, and then she just fades away. And so it's like, oh, that was just his imagination. But then just, pretty quickly after, he's mowing his own grass, and then you see Jenny walking up. Yep. And I was like, oh, it's just, when I originally saw it, I was like, oh, it's just a fantasy, but it's not. She's really there. And it was a really cool little way to like, okay, she's not there. But then when she comes, you're like, oh, is she really there? And you kind of feel like Forrest, like, oh, is this really you? Yeah. And he comes up, and this whole sequence is like, you almost feel like this is the end of the movie. Right. Because like he seems to start to get what he's always wanted. Him and Jenny start having this home life together.
Jenny comes and stays with him in Alabama, and it seems like she's there for weeks, maybe even months. And it just seems like they are, and again, we have all these rhyming images of them in the tree that they were in as kids, and them taking the same walks and doing this, and it's all this, and it's like, it's everything that Forrest has ever wanted. Just like you said, she gives him his iconic shoes, and he describes these shoes as like the best gift that anyone could ever give anyone. And it's just a pair of sneakers. And again, like, this is the movie really paying this off, because one of the first images that we see of Forrest in the movie is these dirty sneakers. And they're filthy. But now we get to see him getting these sneakers as a present. And we still don't know how long has this guy owned these shoes? How long has he been wearing them? And it turns out he's been wearing them for like 4 or 5 straight years. And he literally wore them, but and every day, like, he's not taking these things off because Jenny gave him these sneakers. And
whether or not, and I think I saw this, he might have bought new ones, but they're the exact same pair that Jenny gave him. So.
And they're iconic. And
they're great.
But they have this lovely thing. Also, there's just aspects of this is another thing that I couldn't get as a younger viewer is. He just says, she must have been really tired because she would just sleep all day long. And I don't know. And it's the sense that I get now watching this, especially as a person who's 6 years sober, is like, this is Jenny getting clean off of drugs and trying to be and trying to put her old life of drugs and partying and the unsustainability of that behind her. And part of what's happening is she's literally like, she's just like, she's detoxing, and she hasn't slept like this in years. Like, she has not been able to get good rest in a long time. She's probably been in and out of homelessness. She's probably, and so like there's a lot going on in Jenny's life that Forrest doesn't see or doesn't understand, and that I didn't understand as a viewer for a long time.
Oh, yeah. And I think you're totally right. She is real. This is her decision moment. She's kind of decided, I've got to change, right? And so she stays with Forrest, and she starts, she almost, she does play with the idea of being with Forrest. She, she is obviously detoxed or whatever. She seems to be in a good place. And then, it seems like it's the 4th of July or whatever. And she's going up to bed, and he comes, to the stairs while she's walking up the stairs. And she says, will you marry me? And she says, you don't want to marry me. So she's gotten to where she wants to be, but she's also still doesn't really trust herself fully. And
we got a great, and this is the script. Like, this is why I'm just like, how do you hate on this movie? Because earlier in the film, she kind of flippantly told him, you don't know what love is. And in this scene, she just says, you don't want to marry me, Forrest, because she has, again, such a low view of herself.
Yes.
She doesn't feel worthy of Forrest's love. She doesn't feel worthy of any of the safety that Forrest provides her. It makes her feel deeply ashamed to even be, taking the love that he's offering. So when he says, do you want to marry me? She's just like, she's not in a healthy enough place to say yes to that yet. But Forrest says, why don't you love me, Jenny? She can't respond. And he says, I'm not a smart man.
Well, she says, does she say you don't know what love is, Forrest?
She doesn't say that, but
okay.
He says, why don't you love me, Jenny? And she can't really respond. And then he says, I'm not a smart man, but I know what love is.
And you know, the funny with his voice, this is where it really this is a really good scene, because even though with that voice he really hits it where like, man, that's sad. Like he's like, he knows he's not smart, but he knows what love is, you know. And the fact that he says it in that Forrest voice while not having any sort of comedic tone to it, like I take that line seriously, and he delivers it very well. This is like, wow, that's, you know, this moment for me too was like, man, that hit really hard. And it's a great performance. And then in the evening, you know, that hits Jenny too. She goes upstairs, but then
it's one of the only times in the movie that Forrest ever kind of like, you know, advocates for himself, or something, like that he actually looks at Jenny. Yeah. That he's like, hey, you know, I know I'm not really smart, but like, give me a break. If me, the way that I treat you and feel about you isn't love, then I don't know, you know.
Yeah.
And all these guys that you've been with over the years, if you feel like you've experienced more love, you know. Yeah. I definitely.
This one, and in the evening or in the night, just like when they were kids, she sneaks into his room and she goes and gets in bed with him. And then she, you know, they actually, you know,
they conceive a child.
They do. Yeah. They sleep together. And, but she really does seem like she's trying in this moment. Right.
Yeah.
And then unfortunately the next day she does leave, and the taxi driver's like, where are you running off to? And she's like, I'm not running. And this moment was really interesting, because I still don't get why she does this, but I like that she does this for the movie as a whole. But to me, it just makes me think that, like, I'm glad they don't give a specific reason, but to me, I feel like she's still not ready. You know, she's still she's almost there, but she's not there yet. She just she hasn't fully matured yet, or hasn't fully given into herself and has a good self-image of herself right now. So she gets scared off.
I don't think that I think that she just feels like she's only going to wind up causing pain to Forrest. And so I think it's her just still trying to protect him from her. And it's her still not having a strong enough sense of self-worth and self-esteem to embrace what he's offering and what has always been there: home, safety, love, acceptance. She still can't accept those things because she doesn't fully love herself yet. So she runs away. And I never really liked the sequence as a kid, and the older I get, the more and more I love this sequence, because I think it's so emotionally profound and simple. This idea of this, and it's been the whole movie. Forrest running has been this thing. Run, Forrest, run. From the time he was a little kid to Jenny telling him, if you're ever in trouble in Vietnam, just run, to him running for the University of Alabama, to running all of his friends out of the jungle. And like, the whole movie has had this theme of this guy running, and he's so devastated and heartbroken over and confused about why Jenny just can't love him back or accept the love that he's offering, that he stands up and he just takes off running, and he winds up running back and forth across the United States for like almost 4 years.
Yeah.
And
it's like 3.5 years. He goes back and forth like 3 times or something, or whatever it is. It's crazy.
And he starts this whole movement, and it's almost like because people think that he's doing something really profound, and in a way he really is. It's the most like it's kind of like Forrest Gump having like a nervous breakdown of sorts.
He's dealing with his emotions in the only way he knows how, which is running. And I mean, it is a great sequence. And so I watched the Movies That Made Us on Netflix. And on Forrest Gump, which I would highly recommend anybody watch. It's a great behind the scenes stuff. But the studio didn't want to, as kind of we talked about throughout this whole thing, they wanted to cut the budget, and they wanted to cut this whole sequence. So they sent, one of their executives out, and she was like, Zemeckis didn't want her there, but ultimately she seemed to kind of get on his good side, and she actually helped them hide this sequence so that they could actually film it and pay for it. And because she was like, no, that you have to have this sequence. Like, you have to have the running. It's Americana. It's all the different locations, just all these beauty shots that you could have. And that's what it is. I mean, it really does he's tied so much to America. The fact that he's running through this all the states and everything. It is a great sequence. Like,
It's fantastic. And
I love it.
And it's beautifully shot.
Oh,
and it's
beautiful.
Yeah. And it's just like, and also that, you know, along the way, he helps the guy he comes up with a famous bumper sticker. You know, shit happens. He helps the guy that originate the smiley face. This is maybe one of the goofiest things in the entire movie.
I liked it though, because it is goofy, but yeah. And then he, which I always like this, I don't know, he ends in Utah. He ends in Monument Valley, just running on this road. And then he just stops and he's like, I'm pretty tired. I think I'll go home now, which is the most Forrest Gump thing, is just, he's done. He's, you know, he's got it. He's kind of
even the way
gone through those emotions.
Even the way when people ask him, like, because it becomes this, the news TV cameras are following him around going, why are you doing this? And he just is going, I just felt like running. And even when he's telling, you know, the story on the bench, he's like, people couldn't understand why I was doing it. That I just wanted to run, but he doesn't even fully understand that that's not what's happening. Like it's very clear that he's running because he's processing everything that he's been through, Bubba dying and the war and Mama dying and just this unreachable specter of Jenny. Like, how come she's the only person I've ever cared about the way that I care about her. And I'm sure that she's never, you know, that like nobody's ever offered her the safety and security that I can, but he doesn't have the language to express that. And so or the tools to work through that on an emotional level. So he just runs for 4 years straight until he feels like, okay, I think I've worked it all out.
And this is, I think, you know, I mean, the structure on this is, like we've said, a little untraditional, which I like, but I think this really ultimately brings us to the end of Act 2, and we get into Act 3, because he's pretty much, you know, not really at his lowest point, but he's just moved on. He's gone through all this stuff. And then he reveals, like, you know, I had this run, and then Jenny, the run obviously just happened. It was pretty recently, because then he's like, I got this letter from Jenny and she told me to show up on the number 9 bus. Right. And the old lady's like, oh, you don't need a bus. You can just run over there. It's a few blocks down that way. And
down that
way. And he just runs. And he runs. And this is the part, you know, again, he's done telling his story now, at least in how we've had it for the first 2 acts.
We've had this framing of this man sitting on a bench, and now we've actually, the story has caught up to the present. We know why his shoes are all dirty. It's because those are the shoes he just ran across America back and forth for 4 years in. We know why he's sitting on the bench. It's because Jenny saw him on the TV running across America, and she reached out to him. And we're about to find out that there's something else that he doesn't know, which is he gets to her apartment and pretty quickly finds out that Jenny's got a 4-year-old son.
This is the first scene that I feel like won him the Oscar.
Oh, sure. Oh yeah.
This scene, and like I'm getting chills thinking about it, just with how well he does, because you know, she's talking to her, she's so excited to see him, and this is the first time that like she is excited to see Forrest, and she's very happy.
This is the healthiest we've seen Jenny in the entire.
She looks different. I mean, throughout the whole movie, she's looked very frail, very drug, you know, like,
and kudos. Druggy. We don't talk enough about Robin Wright in this movie, and her being able to show the inner life of this character and express that as an actor. And it's so clear that when we see Jenny in this iteration of her life, where she's just like a waitress at a diner, but she's the happiest she's ever been. She's the most self-actualized she's ever been. She's the most confident she's ever been. And she's the healthy, which she's actually severely unwell and not healthy physically, but mentally and emotionally, she's the healthiest she's ever been.
Yeah. And you can see that she has changed. Yeah. And Robin Wright does an amazing, on this rewatch, I really like Jenny in this movie, just overall, but she's very healthy, but she comes in, she shows him, you know, a scrapbook she made, and then someone knocks on the door and it's her, you know, it's her babysitter or whatever, and drops off her son. And then he's like, oh, you have a daughter, or you have a son. And she's like, yeah, I named him Forrest. And he's like, oh, his name's Forrest, like me. And she goes, yeah, I named him after his daddy. And it's a funny joke because he has a daddy named Forrest too, which is kind of funny. But then she doesn't say anything And
she says,
this
"You're his daddy,
scene,
Forrest."
yeah, and this scene, he backs up, right? He starts to back up, and you can tell he understands the gravity of the situation. And Jenny comes and consoles him and is like, "You haven't done anything wrong. You know, I don't expect anything from you." And he immediately he starts crying, right? And he's like, it's, you know, he says, "Is he smart or is he, you know," and he can't finish the sentence. And she says, "He's very smart." And he starts to accept, like, immediately he's like, he wants to be in this kid's life. And they don't.
But the fact that immediately his biggest fear is he like me?
Right.
Does he have the same problems I have? And that we as the audience are now aware that under Forrest's kind of like happy-go-lucky childlike perspective of the world, he's been acutely aware his entire life that there's something about him that makes it hard for him to make friends, makes it hard for him to have the same kind of relationships that other people have, and that he's aware of that. That he's aware of this difference, this disability, whatever you want to call it. And immediately he's like, "I hope my son doesn't have the same thing I have." And it's heartbreaking for us to realize that Forrest is as aware of who he is as we are.
Yeah. And it's so amazing, like, because you see that emotion in him. You see that he is terrified because he says, "Is he smart or is he, you know, is he like me?" And he's very terrified. And she says, "No, he's smartest. He's the smartest of his class." But then, like, immediately at that point, you see that there's this relief, and it seems like his fear turns to happiness. And he says, "You know, can I go talk to him?" She says, "Yeah." And he goes up and he's so excited to sit with his son, who's played by Haley Joel Osment.
Yeah.
And I mean, he doesn't do a ton, but he does a great job. But he sits next to his son and he's just talking, and you see they go to a shot of Jenny, and you can tell that she's like, this is where she needs to be. You know, this is what she needs. And they go to some park, and little Forrest is playing, and then Forrest, you know, tells her, she's like, "You know, I'm sick. The doctors don't really know what I have."
Which, it's another thing that as a kid I didn't clock what this was, but it's obviously, again, just fitting in with the theme of this movie kind of being a recounting of historical events. This is the AIDS epidemic. Jenny was a user of intravenous drugs and also, you know, had lots of unprotected sex with lots of partners. We don't know how she got it, but what the screenplay is pretty heavily suggesting without outright saying is that Jenny is one of the earliest cases in the United States of someone having AIDS, because she's like, they don't know what it is yet. And so this is probably like the mid 80s that this is happening.
Well, she died in 82. Okay. And so I think this is around 1980, 81, something like that.
So this is the very beginning of the AIDS epidemic.
Yes. And so she says, "I've got something and I'm really sick." He's like, "Well, I can take care of you." Says, "You and little Forrest, you can come and live with me." And then I love this. I didn't really notice this, you know, the last few times I watched it, but she actually proposes to him.
Yeah.
And this is, again, Forrest being a passive protagonist. It fits so perfectly because now Jenny, you could say she is she is a protagonist, but this is kind of the completion of her arc. She makes the decision to want to marry Forrest, and she asks him, "Will you marry me, Forrest?" And he gets so happy, he just says, "Okay," you know. And like, he's so excited, and I love that moment in this rewatch. Like, wow, she made the decision and he couldn't be more happy.
I love the one nice shot we get of them, like, as a family down in Alabama, walking, the three of them together. It's like, and he just gets, we never get a real sense of how much time he actually gets to be with her as with the three of them as a family. But they do have this really nice wedding. We get Dan Taylor shows up again. He's, a completely different guy. He's got short hair and he's got magic legs. He's got magic legs, which, again, this effect, they could have done a cut where they went, like, they just like showed it, but they actually, the camera tilts down and Gary Sinise lifts up his pant leg and taps it with a cane, and it's like a metal leg. And it's like, I don't know if they had Gary Sinise just like kneeling on that and they just green screened out. I don't know.
Probably.
But it's a cool little effect.
Yeah.
And
they get married.
And it's a really nice little closure for Lieutenant Dan. We know that Dan Taylor is a millionaire who's got a fiance, and he's got this whole full life because of Forrest Gump, because Forrest Gump saved his life in Vietnam. And Forrest and Jenny get married, and it's this.
They spend as much time together as they can. And he doesn't have to work, so.
Yeah, they have a really nice little scene where that mirrors him talking to his mama, where Jenny's in bed, and he kind of recounts some of the things we've seen in the movie. And then we cut to this scene of we hear voiceover of him saying, "You died on a Tuesday," and we cut to him reading a letter to her at her grave. And I bet you're going to say this is the other scene that sealed the Oscar for him.
That's exactly what I was going to say. This is the other scene that I was like, these two scenes, when he does that with his son and when he's recounting to Jenny, I was like bawling. Yeah. It was like and it was so well acted. Mm-hmm. Like the fact that they come in real soft. You died on a Tuesday. Right. And then he buried her under the tree that they would, climb in, and then he gives basically a recount of Forrest, how he's doing in school. Yeah. And he starts crying about how smart he is, and just how proud he is, and she would be so proud of him. And it's just this whole scene. I was like, wow,
we're now as an audience finally getting introduced to the rich inner world of our storyteller. He seemed like this simpleton the whole movie. Everyone calls him stupid. Everyone, we've even thought of him as kind of being simple or stupid, but now we see that when it comes to emotional intelligence and emotional awareness, he might not have the language skills to express it like everybody else, but he does have a very sophisticated emotional understanding of love and family. And, and there's something so much more that we understand about this guy now, about that. He's not just, he's not just this two-dimensional kind of like weird cartoon character that's floating through these historical events. He's actually like this kind of like deep and rich person, because he gives us this speech. And I said this earlier in the episode. We'll get back to it. We've talked about this theme of destiny versus, but when he's talking to Jenny at her grave, he says, some people think, I'm not sure who has it right. I don't know if Mama's right, if we're just floating along like a breeze, or I don't know if it's Lieutenant Dan, that everybody's got a destiny. I'm not sure. And then he says, but maybe I think it's both, that it's a little bit of both, that there are things that happen to us that we don't really control, and that kind of, that also we have forces that pull us through our lives. And it's a little bit of, of both things there. And it's like, for him to be, that's maybe the most sophisticated idea that he expresses in the entire movie, maybe next to that speech that we don't get to hear that he gives in Washington, DC.
And I think I love, and again, on this, on this rewatch, him saying that, I was immediately like, that's been the whole movie, is kind of these two. And I love that conclusion that he comes to, because at least in my personal opinion, it does, it is, there are a lot of things in life that are random, that seem to have no thing, but then there are other things that seem like, oh, this was supposed to happen. And I like that he comes to that conclusion that, maybe it's both, because maybe it is both, it's a very intelligent conclusion to come to for Forrest. And I really do enjoy, and it fits so well. I mean, it brings everything, together when he's saying that, and it fits so well with everything that the movie has been telling us. And
we have a nice little tag here to take us out, where he's walking little Forrest to the bus stop.
Well, sorry, I'm going to cut you off.
Yeah, sure.
So after he leaves, the one thing I want to mention too, he leaves her grave, and when he's leaving, you see birds flying away, which we didn't talk about this much, but she says she wanted to be, when her dad was coming, she wanted to turn me into a bird so I can fly far, far away. And she's always this theme of kind of birds and her wanting to fly away, her wanting to, in a lot of ways she thinks about committing suicide, and that's what she feels is a bird, right? But then when she dies and birds fly away, it's really, really great. It's a great little detail.
Another little detail, the scene where she climbs up on
the
thing to they're playing Freebird by Leonard Skinner, and this bird,
very intentional.
This bird you cannot cage and all that stuff. But yeah, so that is a visual and auditory and theme that follows Jenny through the story. And these birds fly, and that's really lovely. Yeah, we get this nice little tag where little Forrest is going on his first day of school, and it's Dorothy Harris, who's the bus driver, who was the bus driver when, and she looks like she hasn't aged a day. This is a weird little moment in this movie where I'm like, do they intentionally just be like, this Dorothy Harris woman she's just timeless. She's just
that's kind of what I think.
She's the timeless, ageless bus driver of that. It almost feels like but again, this movie has all these rhyming scenes. So it's very similar to the scene where young Forrest Gump early on in the film got on the bus for the first time and introduced himself to Dorothy Harris, the bus driver. Haley Joel Osment does the same thing and introduces himself to Dorothy Harris. Gets on the bus, and little Forrest had said, I want to bring this Curious George book to school with me because grandma used to read it to you. And when he's showing him the book, or when Tom Hanks is looking at the book, the feather falls out of the book and falls down on his foot. And so Haley Joel Osment gets on the bus, he takes off, nice little moment where Forrest tells his son that he loves him, and then a gust of wind blows and our feather takes off again. And we follow the feather, and that's, how
great bookend. It starts and ends with the feather. And it is a perfect theme pretty much for the whole movie.
Again, it's like wherever this feather came from, it randomly happened to land on this man's foot, got placed in his book, got to live with him and Jenny and his son for a little bit. And then after Jenny passed away, the feather takes off again. And the bird, again, like this, the feather of a bird, really nice little visual storytelling. And that's Forrest Gump. This was a longer conversation for us.
It was
because there's a lot of movie. This is like 12 movies in one.
Pretty much.
It's got a lot of stuff going on. Let's get into our rating system. We do a grade for technical proficiency. That's just the technical craft of filmmaking, cinematography, acting, music, all that good stuff. We do a rating for the ending. We do a rating for rewatchability. We do a rating for cultural relevance, and we do a rating for our subjective score. All of these are on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best. Okay, so technical rating, I give Forrest Gump a 9 out of 10.
Yeah, I gave it a 9 as well.
Yeah.
I love it. I think just the mouth is kind of the only thing that really pegs it down to a 9.
It's 1994.
It is.
I honestly, there's a lot of effects that I'm like, I'm not sure there are many effects houses doing it any better today, 30 years later.
It is.
So
it looks real good.
They were pioneering technology and like really doing a pretty seamless job. I don't know why I don't give this movie a 10 out of 10 technically. Technically, it's about as well constructed as it. Maybe I'll give it a 9.5 because I said 9. I'm going to bump it up to 9.5.
I'm going to bump it up too because I kind of agree with you. Like it's just barely. I'm going to do that too.
The ending. I'll give this movie a 10.
I gave it a 10 as well. Just that scene, those two scenes, and just the fact, it hits it for me. 10 for sure.
Yeah, rewatchability. I'm gonna do 9.5, and I don't even know why I'm docking the 0.5. I'm doing a 10. I'm doing a 10 because I can rewatch. This movie a ton. It is a little long, but I can rewatch it anytime. You can pick up wherever it is, and you know where you are, and it's fun to watch. I quote it like crazy. I'm always seeing news because there's so much movie, and because the movie's so dense. I'm always seeing new stuff. I'm always picking up new things. So the rewatchability is definitely there. Cultural relevance. This movie was huge in 1994, and it is still discussed today. I'll give it a 9 on its effect on culture.
That's what I gave it as well. It had a huge impact. It still has an impact today. It has influenced a lot, right? But it was a big one.
Yeah, and subjective score, I'm doing a 9. And that's just my own personal thing of being like, there are movies that are like 10 out of 10s for me. And I don't know. Forrest Gump might be on my top 100 favorite list movies of all time.
Right.
I don't know. Man, maybe I should just give it a 10, but I'm going to give it a 9 just because I don't know.
I gave it a 10. And 10s, I think, are my favorite movies. Yeah. However many that may be, I think just are either the most impactful for me as a person and just some of the movies that I enjoy the most. And I think this is one that I really do enjoy. It's a great, and after watching it this time too, is like, wow, what a movie. Like, it is a great movie. So
yeah, I'm going to enjoy watching Forrest Gump for the rest of my life, I think. And I'm going to keep seeing new things and finding new layers. And, I'm really excited for our next week conversation because there's a lot. I haven't seen the movie yet, and I'm trying to withhold judgment, and I don't want to look at any reviews, but I do have a lot of thoughts on certain aspects of Robert Zemeckis' film career. So we are going to be talking about Here next week, which is Robert Zemeckis' new film starring Tom Hanks and Robin Wright. It's this team from Forrest Gump getting back together. I will say that what I do know is the movie is not being very well reviewed. And I'm not going to look at those reviews. I'm not going to try to take that into the theater with me, but I just will say that Zemeckis sort of has, and he speaks about this in interviews extensively, that his obsession with digital filmmaking is that, like, he doesn't have to deal with any of the problems of production. He can control all of the elements, like when he's making a movie like Beowulf or The Polar Express, or, and I don't know, like, what's weird is, like, objectively, his most famous movies and most beloved movies are movies that had really fraught processes. Back to the Future had a they had to reshoot the movie because they cast the wrong guy as the lead. Who Framed Roger Rabbit was like, it's insane that movie got made. It's, and Forrest Gump, as we've talked about throughout this episode, like, almost didn't happen so many times for so many different reasons, almost got shut down. And I think that there's something about conflict that breeds really successful and kind of timeless art. And I think what's happened in Zemeckis' career as he's aged is, like, he's become more obsessed with just, like, a perfect process that has no problems, and I'm like, I think your movies do better when you have to struggle a little bit more to get them made. Now, I don't know that I might go see Here and love it. So
the one that I completely agree. Zemeckis takes big swings, which I appreciate. Many, many times he strikes out, but I appreciate that he does that and he takes chances. I will say, no matter how good the movie is, I'm trying to also just kind of have low expectations. It's always good to have low expectations for movies. But I will say, Here is one of the best trailers I have seen in a long time. And it might be one of the best trailers I've ever seen, like in the top 20 or something. But the trailer for Here, if you have not seen it, you should go watch it. I was blown away by the trailer. Now, we'll see how the movie is, but at least the trailer is good, and it's a great trailer. So there you go. We got
excited to see. So we'll kind of do Robert Zemeckis, Tom Hanks, and Robin Wright Part 2 on next week's episode.
Part 2.
Yeah, Part 2. Folie à deux.
Folie à deux.
Forrest Gump, Folie à deux.
Yeah.
Let us know what you think about Forrest Gump. If you hung out with us for the entirety of this episode, give us a like, share, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. We're trying to get this show rolling, thanks for watching and being here with us, and we'll see you on the next one. Until then, take care and goodbye.
See you next time.